I was a busy boy in May. I read a lot. Hello, and welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I'm going to give a summary for everything that I read in May. I read a lot. I finished 22 books and 43 short stories, and I'm going to try to get through a lot of it here. Some of it is going to be very cursory, not a whole lot of details on each individual book, but I did a lot of reading for Horror Mayhem. I will link some videos in the description of this video where I did the Decades of Dread project, where I read a short story for every decade from 1850 up through the 2020s. So I will not cover those short stories in this video, but I do want to talk about some of the books that I read for Horror Mayhem, because books under 250 pages count. And one of them was Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. This book gets a lot of excellent praise on BookTubers from a lot of people that I admire. So I went into this book expecting something absolutely fantastic. I did this as a buddy read with Bad is Rad, and both of us came out reading this book going, it was okay, but it fell short of the fabulous and the fantastic. It is essentially a story of some Latina women who summon a goddess into one of themselves, and she goes on doing some very rude and nasty things. But I was expecting so much more out of this novel. I liked it. I do want to read more by this author, but it was a disappointment, especially after reading such extreme praise about this book. But other readers should judge for themselves, because a lot of people really do like this book. Another book I picked up when I was on Independent Bookstore Day. I was down in Charlottesburg, Virginia, and they had a book crawl. And one of these bookstores was an LGBTQ bookstore. And I felt obligated to buy a book because I was in a book crawl, and I wanted to help support all the independent bookstores. Unfortunately, I don't think this was the best selection for me. It is essentially a horror novella, and I found out it is essentially a young adult horror novella about a young man who discovers some strange things happening in his town. This ooze is taking people over and turning them into, let's say, some sort of zombie. That's not exactly correct. But wow, what a lightweight book this was. Now, again, this is young adult, and I'm a 60-year-old man. It does have some LGBTQ themes. The main character is mostly listed with the he pronoun until there is a urination scene, and you learn a little bit more about this character. I don't think that is what disappointed me. What disappointed me was the horror was not developed. The ooze, this mysterious substance that's taking over people, just had no substance to the backing. It was just there, and you had your main character who had to go out and defeat the ooze. Very disappointing. Lair by James Herbert. This is a sequel to The Rats. The Rats is perhaps the best killer animal novel ever written, and I was looking forward to this sequel. I thought it was going to be new to me, but I looked over my database, and I actually read this novel in the early aughts, and I completely forgot about it. And there is a good reason I completely forgot about this. This is nowhere near the level of excellence of The Rats. I'm not saying that this is going to be a bad book. It does have its moments. The Rats do have some interesting kills, but it feels like the author was just phoning this novel in, and I was extremely disappointed. On my Kindle, I read The Vessel by Adam Nevill. Adam Nevill is rising in my estimation of one of the great horror authors publishing today. He is now an independent author. He publishes all his books on his own, even though he did start off as a mainstream publisher, a mainstream author. And in this story, a young woman with a child, she's not a child, she's about 10 years old again, something, maybe a little younger, is going to get a new job caretaking an elderly, mentally disabled woman. And there's something very odd in this estate. The woman lives alone. All her relatives want nothing to do with her. And this woman's husband, well, he's a bit sketchy. And she learns a little bit more about this woman who is basically catatonic for the most part, but not always. And something happened to this woman's husband. And what happened to this woman's husband may going to be happening to the current woman, the woman who's her caretaker, taking care of her. Out of the 4 novels previously that I read by Adam Nevill, I think this is his weakest. I did like The Ritual and The Reddening and All the We Need of Hell, or All the Fiends Out of Hell, much more than this one. But still, he's an author worth checking out and worth reading. Another book that I read on my Kindle was And By God's Hand You Shall Die by David Sodergen, another independent author. He's out of Scotland, and I have read 3 other books by him, and they're all a lot of fun. He's a very competent author. Now, even though he is out of Scotland, he set this one in the 70s and 80s in New York City. And in the first story, a church burns down and has to be rebuilt. But they rebuild it as this industrial building with no windows. And it is turned into a whorehouse. And the main story is one of the whores who works in this establishment of ill repute. And things start happening in this house. Something comes alive in the basement. And it is a very unusual thing to bring to life. I have never experienced it before in a horror novel, and I kind of liked it. As with The Vessel, I don't think this book is one of Sodergen's best efforts, even though I did enjoy it. As an audiobook, I listened to Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. I did read this book in the early aughts, and it is a really fantastic, atmospheric horror novel. I'm sure everyone knows the basic story. A young couple get an exclusive deal into an apartment in New York City. And then the woman becomes pregnant. And they have some rather nosy neighbors. And these neighbors are, well, not too much of a spoiler, Satanists. And they have plans for Rosemary. Now, is this an accurate description of Satanism in America? I don't think so. Not by a long shot. And this novel probably helped fuel the satanic panic that happened in the 70s. But either way, I really enjoyed this novel. Very atmospheric, very much of a slow burn, but I liked it a lot. I listened to the audiobook of The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor. This one may be a bit of a stretcher to include in Horror Mayhem because it is mostly a thriller with just some horror elements thrown in. It is told in 2 timelines. One is mostly current, where the narrator is a 40-year-old teacher. And he is also describing what happened to him when he was 10 years old. And he and his friends discovered a body in the woods. A body without a head. So the mystery starts off from there because something that happened into the past is slowly reoccurring in the current times. This was a really enjoyable thriller. There are 2 ends to this book. One end was fine. It's a thriller, well worked up, and unexpected for the most part. The second part of the ending was totally expected and didn't surprise me at all. But don't let that put you off. This is an enjoyable book. I listened to the audiobook of The Silence by Tim Lebbon. In this story, a cave is opened somewhere in Eastern Europe. And out of this cave comes blind creatures that hunt humans by sound. And then there is the main characters. There is a man and his family. One of his daughters is deaf, and they have to escape from these monsters that hunt by sound. Does that not sound like a movie? A Quiet Place? It does indeed, but The Silence was published before that movie was released. I talked about this in the Horror Mayhem Voxer group, saying, did The Quiet Place steal from Tim Lebbon? Most people thought that it was just a coincidence about these storylines sort of looking a lot like each other, close together in time. I don't know. Tim Lebbon, as far as I know, never sued the director of A Quiet Place, so maybe it just was a coincidence. As for a novel, it kind of worked for me. I liked the idea of blind monsters hunting by sound, and I think it worked in a very different way from the movie A Quiet Place. It was a lot broader in scope, a lot less focused than the movie. But the ending of the book, a lot of people criticized the ending of Silence. They saying, why did you end the book that way? Well, if you've ever read Day of the Triffids, you kind of know how The Silence is going to end. I guess that's a little bit of a spoiler, but not a big one. But I did enjoy The Silence. And those were the books that I finished for Horror Mayhem 2025. I think it was a good May for horror. I was also reading for Maybe Midrash. This is an event created by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, which encourages people to read books about religion, not as a religious text, but just to learn a little bit more about religion. And I read a few. The first was Barabbas by Par Lagerkvist, translated from the Swedish. This author won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Now, on the hills of Golgotha, there were 3 men about to be crucified. The crowd was given the chance to pardon one of them. They did not pardon Jesus Christ, they pardoned Barabbas. And this is the tale of what happened to Barabbas afterwards. Barabbas is a tough man. He does not know what to believe. He does not believe the stories that are being told about Jesus Christ. He needs more evidence. He needs proof. He wants to believe, but he cannot believe. And that is the setup for this novel. As a non-Christian, does this novel work for me? In ways it does. I like the way the author uses Barabbas's non-belief, his doubt, and his search for meaning in religion. I think it is a novel that many people could pick up and enjoy. I read Water by Rumi, translated from the Persian. I really enjoyed this translator's previous book, Gold, of Rumi's poems, and I was really looking forward to it. Rumi was a mystical Sufi poet, and his poems describe the universe, man's place in the universe, and what he thinks about the universe. How does he love the universe or the beloved, the creator, the God behind it all? Did I like it as much as the first volume? No, I didn't, but I'm still glad that I read it. I listened to the audiobook God and Anatomy by Francesca Stavrakopoulou. I am fairly certain I am butchering her last name. She is a Hebrew Bible expert and also an expert in ancient Near Eastern texts. And she's talking about the differences between modern religions and ancient religions. Modern religions view God as an incorporeal being. He does not have a body, but that is very different from the early religions. Early worshippers envisioned Yahweh having a physical body. And in this book, she goes through all the body parts that God had and how they relate to what people believed and their references in the Bible and other texts. I thought this was a fascinating study, but a little long for my taste, a little too detailed. I'm sure it's very good for scholars and people who want to learn more about the biblical text, but I'm just a general reader. And as a general reader, I wanted a little bit less detail and more big picture stuff. But still, the idea is that God was once believed to have a physical body, which is no longer believed, even though both people use the same texts. Another project that I want to start is reading books about anti-authoritarianism, either in fiction or nonfiction. And it just so happened that I picked up 2 works which would qualify for anti-authoritarianism in May. The first is Autocracy, Inc. by Anne Applebaum. She's investigating the rise of modern authoritarian regimes and how they collaborate to undermine democracy. I remember talking in a live. I was just a guest, and it was Steve Donahue, and I mentioned how I read this book and how I fear that everything he talks about in this book is going to come true. And Steve Donahue retorted, says, no, it is already true that autocracy and authoritarianism is here in the United States right now. And I have a hard time disagreeing with that. This book was originally published, I believe, in late 2024, before Trump was elected to his second term. It is a book that will open your eyes. On my Kindle, I also read Fascism, A Warning by Madeline Albright, the ex-U.S. Secretary of State. In this book, Albright examines the history and rise of fascist leaders from the 20th and 21st century. And reading over this history, you see a lot of parallels of what is going on right now. And this book was published before Trump was running for election in 2024. And my question is, how can anyone fail to see the current regime and the links to fascism? Another fascinating book that everyone, or nearly everyone, should probably take a look at. Even though this is a May wrap-up, in the last week of May, I jumped the gun and started June on the Range early. I listened to the audiobook of Guns of the Timberlands by Louis L'Amour. Louis L'Amour is perhaps the most famous Western writer in the modern age. And this novel does not fail to deliver. It was originally published in 1955 and is a very traditional Western story. There is a cattleman somewhere out in the West. He is in a new town, learning to live with his town and grow with his town. But on his cattle ranch, his land, there is some timber, and an unscrupulous businessman wants to gain access to his timber. Let's just say there's some mano-a-mano action with fists and guns, and there is also a fiery redhead for the romance. It was pretty good. I started a new series, Jubalcade #1, The Killing Trail. Jubalcade was an orphan raised in Chicago. He went off to England to study medicine, and once he got his medicine degree, he came back to the United States with his British wife, and they were going to go head out west to make a new life. Let's just say this trail out west is filled with blood and woe. It was written by Charles R. Pike. That is a pen name for George G. Gilmore, who wrote the Edge series. George G. Gilmore is also a pen name. I believe the author's real name is Terry Hackett. It was a pretty exciting Western adjacent story, because by the end of this novel, he's just not quite out west yet. But very exciting. There is some progress in this story. You kind of know what's going to happen to this character, but you think it's going to happen by chapter 3, and the author keeps it going till the end. Very enjoyable. I am also a co-host for Spring into Adventure, and I did read one adventurous book, Beat to Quarters by C.S. Forster. This is the first book published in the Hornblower series about a sea captain in the Napoleonic War. As I said, first book published, but this starts off when he's already a captain and he's in the Pacific Ocean on a secret mission. Is this the best sea adventure novel I've ever written? Not by a long shot, but I'm still going to continue with the Hornblower series. It does get bogged down when Hornblower picks up a lady as a passenger, and let's just say some romance is going back and forth, even though Hornblower is married. Not graphic romance by any stretch of the imagination. This book was originally published, I believe, in 1933 or 1936, so it's not going to get too sexy. It's still a fun adventure book, though. I will continue to read the Hornblower series, but I'm going to read them in publication order and not chronological story order. I finished Mortal Gods by Jonathan Fast. This is a science fiction novel from the 70s. I have a complete video of my review of this book, so I'm just going to link that. Overall, it's just okay. I bought some noir paperbacks from NYRB Classics. I released a video last week of my unboxing, and this is the first book that I read out of that unboxing. That is Day of the Owl by Leonardo Cesaro, translated from the Italian. It's a noir adjacent story. It is the story of a man who was murdered and the police detective who has to figure out who the murderer is, although it involves the mafia. It's a little hard to follow in some places because I'm not Italian, and they do talk a lot about the loyalty of a Sicilian to the mob, and that lost me just a little bit, although I did enjoy the book overall. I also read Fatale by Jean-Patrick Machette, translated from the French. This book starts off with some men on a hunting trip, and this woman comes up and kills them. And then the woman named Amy goes off to another town. She's starting to establish herself, but she's also looking for something. She wants people to hire her to kill people because she likes killing. And this one is a lot of fun. Amy is a complicated character, and it takes a while, even though this book is only 98 pages long, to get to the crux of Amy, why she's an assassin. I have read other books by Jean-Patrick Machette. He is one of the best-known noir French authors, and I highly recommend this author for people who like crime fiction and noir fiction. My favorite of his books is probably Nada, but this one is good in and of itself. For my in-person book group, I listened to the audiobook of This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger. This is an historical novel set in 1930s America. It features two young boys, Caucasians, sent to an Indian orphanage because the white orphanages were completely full. Something at this orphanage happens, it is really bad, and the two brothers and two of their friends have to flee on the river on a canoe. It becomes quite an adventure for these four young orphans. The four young travelers meet a faith healer with a snake named Lucifer, and they are pursued by the Black Witch. The Black Witch is the wife of the person who runs the orphanage. The Black Witch believes one of the travelers, a girl, can see into the future, and she wants that girl for herself. Overall, it's a pretty decent novel, but not a great one. I listened to the audiobook Wolves of Winter by Dan Jones. This is an historical novel set in the 14th century. It is a sequel to The Essex Dogs. This novel picks up basically right where Essex Dogs left off, so you kind of have to read Essex Dogs first. As I said, this is a 14th century history about the British going to war with France. I know nothing about this war. Although it's an interesting story, it features the first time gunpowder was used by the English in wartime. How curious. As a story, I think it works okay. Dan Jones is mostly known as an historian, and sometimes I think he was writing a history about these wars in the 14th century and just decided to throw it all together in a novel. It kind of works. I will be reading the third book in this trilogy when it comes out later in 2025. I listened to the audiobook The Kraken Wakes by John Wyndham. John Wyndham is more famously known for The Day of the Triffids. The Day of the Triffids is one of my all-time favorite science fiction novels. And in this science fiction novel, it is discovered that something is living in the depths of the oceans and is starting a war with humanity. It works pretty well. It's nowhere near as good as The Day of the Triffids, but I still liked it enough. And I do want to read more John Wyndham novels because he is one of the classic science fiction novelists from the 50s. Those are all the books that I read in May. That's 22 books that come to 5,149 pages. Quite a lot. I also read 42 short stories in May. A lot of those were for Horror Mayhem, and the link to my Decades of Dread project will be included in the description of this video. But I did read other short stories. Two of them for another project that I'm working on. They were two Audible stories narrated by Virtual Voice. Virtual Voice is basically AI reading the story instead of a regular audiobook narrator. I will be talking about those two stories in a later video. I'm continuing to read the short stories of Jorge Luis Borges. I read 6 in May. None of the 6 are really his best, so we'll just leave them at that. I'm still working on my J.G. Ballard project with Gareth at Book Songs and Other Magic, although this project may not continue for much longer. It's kind of tough to read all these stories in chronological order because J.G. Ballard didn't always write great stories right off the bat. I'm just getting to the point where the stories are getting good, but this project just doesn't have the legs to continue, I think. Even though some of the stories that I finished this month Chronopolis and The Voice of Time, we're actually getting to the point where I'm saying, yeah, there's a reason why Ballard is one of the best science fiction novelists out there, even though his short stories just aren't up to snuff yet. I am also working on a project to read the 25 best science fiction short stories ever written in the 20th century. Earlier this year, I did a video where I selected what I thought were the 25 best stories and then asked AI to select its choices for the 25 best. I merged those lists together and came up with a list of short stories that I needed to read or reread. And I've been picking up some steam. This month, I mostly read out of this collection, although a few of the stories I read were from other books. The best stories of this month were probably It's a Good Life by Jerome Bixby, The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke. I was also surprised about how much I liked The Cold Equations by Tom Goodwin. Some of the duds were Vintage Season by Henry Kuttner. It just was not very good. And then there was Harrison Burgeon by Kurt Vonnegut. That's one of the stories not included in this volume. I also read All You Zombies by Robert A. Heinlein. Again, not collected in this volume. Now, All You Zombies is, of course, a very famous science fiction short story, but it's not going to make it into my top 10, I don't think. Well, anyway, all the stories that I read this month will be listed in the description of this video because it's way too many to talk about in one video. And how many pages did I read? Well, that was 749 pages of short stories when you include the Decades of Dread. About a short story per day. And I'm going to continue with that pace into June. At least, I hope so. Well, thank you for watching and keep on reading.